The Lion, first among Primarchs, is the template from which all the other demigod sons of the Emperor were created. The Lord of the First Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, the Dark Angels, is perhaps the most exceptional loyalist being in the galaxy during the 42nd millennium. And yet, he carries with him many dark secrets, and some of the most terrible truths in Warhammer 40K, the scariest of which we will discuss in this video. While the Primarch of the First Legion has an extensive and thorough backstory and is majorly featured in the lore of the Horus Heresy and events leading up to it, we aren't going to examine any of that in this video. I'm going to go through the Lion in Warhammer 40K, his return, his reunion with his sons the Dark Angels, and their successor chapters, the Unforgiven, as well as what he's done, who he's fought, and ultimately what his return to the setting means for the future of Warhammer 40,000. If you haven't read The Lion, Son of the Forest, the Arks of Omen campaign books, and the 10th edition Dark Angels Codex, this video will spoil major events from those books. The Lion awoke in what was seemingly a medieval forest, basically a mirror of Caliban, where he neither knew where he was nor who he was. The Primarch had total amnesia. As he slowly made his way through the life he had newly awakened to, it soon became obvious to him that he was an exceptional being. His only guide in life was one of the Watchers in the Dark, the diminutive Xenos race that helps the Dark Angels and was ostensibly native to Caliban. After many trials and tribulations, the Lion recovers his memories and begins to piece together what happened to him and his legion, and starts his plans for how to remedy everything that went wrong. This leads him on a major redemption arc, where he seeks out his wayward sons, the fallen Dark Angels, for only the Primarch can truly, in his opinion, pass judgment on his sons. So he picks up the Emperor's shield on the way, which can reflect any damage done to it back on the attacker, a gift from his father that became real in the weird webway-like semi-quasi-dimension that he found himself in. But he carried it out into real space, proving that the Emperor can manifest things into the Lion's forest dimension that are real. But what is a shield without a sword? After all, the Lion is a knight, literally. So of course El'Jonson receives a sword worthy of him. Okay, I'm still pissed at Guilliman for snapping the Lion sword over his knee, but honestly this new sword may just be even better. Fealty. And it is literally Excalibur in space in like every way. If you're familiar with Arthurian legends at all, then you'll recognize this immediately. But it is well done and it is awesome. Lion pulls the sword from the stone, and now with the Emperor's shield and the sword fealty, he sets out on his mission of being the ultimate badass in the galaxy. This is where he is currently, but how he got there starts when he gets in touch with his wayward sons, starting with the fallen angel Zabriel. And this doesn't go so well at first, as Zabriel literally tries to kill the Lion on sight. They battle, and the Lion is able to subdue the fallen angel, but before he can kill his wayward son, the regular humans that Zabriel lives with come out and stop the Lion. They stay his hand and plead with him, making him realize that if regular non-tainted chaos folk are willing to make the case that Zabriel was their protector, well, then there's more going on than is readily apparent on the surface. And that is exactly the case. As Zabriel and the Lion talk, they both come to realize that the other are not traitors, that the Fallen and the rest of the First Legion fell out and fired upon each other based on a lie, that only the leadership of the Fallen had gone over to Chaos, so only Luther and a few others were really to blame. But this is where the Lion sort of starts to do some stuff that is rather out of character for him. He stops and thinks things through, something the Primarch wasn't exactly known for back during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. The Lion realizes that Zabriel assumed the Primarch was either there to kill him or a warp entity parading as him and also there to kill him. So he immediately forgave Zabriel for his indiscretion, and then makes the Space Marines swear an oath of fealty, and swear that he did not know the First Legion was still loyal, and it was a misunderstanding that the Fallen fired on the Legion during the Battle of Caliban. And Zabriel did so swear. But then he made the Lion swear the same. Primarch or not, the Space Marine had not trusted his father for hundreds of years of perceived time. And the Lion literally swore he was not a traitor either, and regained Zabriel's respect, though it was touchy and edgy at first. And this is very jarring for the Lion, as he has to accept some horrible truths, and one very, very dark secret that he wasn't even admitting to himself. Zabriel reminds him, and I think this is like the key breakthrough moment for the Lion, where he starts his own personal redemption arc and self-betterment. But yeah, Zabriel reminds him that on Caliban, during the civil war between the forces of Luther and the forces of the Lion, that the loyalist side was not blameless, and that the Lion himself had innocent blood on his hands. Zabriel had watched as new recruits who had never even seen their Primarch in person were cut down by the Lion like wheat, as he mindlessly butchered his way through his problems instead of trying to figure out the truth before overreacting. And this was a big moment. The Lion realized that he was totally awful, that he was no better than any of his sons that he and the Dark Angels had called traitor. This is when the Lion woke up and decided to reclaim his truth. He decided that he had set a poor example for his sons, and he took it seriously, wanting to dedicate his life and his time to healing his legion as best he could. So Zabriel was not only scattered through space when the warp storm destroyed Caliban, but he was flung through time as well. And when he came out of the warp storm, it was near the current timeline, and he was only kicking around in the galaxy for a few hundred years, where some of the other Fallen had been active for millennia. Zabriel was absolutely hunted down by his former brothers of the current Dark Angels chapter, and the Unforgiven successor chapters as well. So being taken under the wing of the Primarch and literally forgiven by him, Zabriel becomes the first of the Risen, Lion El'Jonson's elite inner circle of former Fallen. And Lion and Zabriel go all over the galaxy using the Lion's Forest Walk ability. He just seems drawn to his former sons, and some wind up seeking redemption, renounce Luther and the Fallen, and join back up with the Lion. As long as they weren't chaos tainted, the Lion is willing to take his sons back. And those who don't wish to rejoin the fold are allowed to walk away and choose their own path as long as they so swear to aid humanity and not to harm or hinder it. But most either choose to join the Lion, as it means not only forgiveness, but that they won't be hunted by the Ravenwing and Deathwing relentlessly across the galaxy any longer, or to fight him and his newly acquired posse of old school homies. Now I have to say that I relate to this guy more than just about any other character ever. I've had amnesia myself from a car wreck. I mean, I didn't even recognize my own mom when I saw her. It took a long time to get back what I am now assuming was most of my memories. I've had my oldest friends become my most hated enemies over misperceptions, lies, and misunderstandings, only to sort those out many years later when we all came to our senses and decided to talk. And I've had many of my closest homies pass away, leaving me in a world with only tertiary friends with questionable loyalty. Yeah, the Lion's story is basically my own. Oh yeah, and I can also really identify with the uncrowned princes, what the Dark Angels were called before their Primarch reunited with the Legion after being found by the Emperor. I mean, my great-great-grandfather was literally an emperor himself. What did you think, it was just a YouTube handle? Nope, I'm the namesake of Tsar Alexander III, and I know what it is like to see the empire your family should be inheriting go from being in terrible peril to a stinking pile of shit. Imagine waking up 10,000 years after being horribly wounded and placed into a magical deep sleep by the Watchers in the Dark. You fought for centuries to expand the Imperium and unify human worlds across the galaxy in the name of the Imperial Truth, an atheistic creed imposed by the Emperor. But you've awakened into an Imperium that is crumbling, decaying from within, and entirely based on the most extreme superstition and dogma imaginable. A fascist state where the Emperor, if not truly a god yet, is definitely in the process of becoming one. And the Emperor Father, who you fought so hard for and sacrificed so much for, is now only sustained by consuming the literal souls of thousands of psychers a day. A cosmic horror, an unimaginable monster from the darkest depths of Lovecraft's mind or something like it. That doesn't sit too well with the Lion. So he goes about simply making the galaxy a better place wherever he goes. He eventually finds, though, that the very planet where he first came back into real space, Kamarth, is now under the influence of one of the lost sons who fell to chaos, the sorcerer Seraphax. And Seraphax is carving out a mini empire and has taken several worlds, and is the leader of a group of Chaos Fallen known as the 10,000 Eyes Warband. And Seraphax is extremely powerful. He has a dark and deceptive plan that, unlike many villains in Warhammer, he put a lot of thought into. Seraphax wants to remove the lion's soul from his body and puppet the corpse like a marionette using sorcery, and his silly plan was then to use the lion's body to approach the Emperor and kill his physical body. Wow. This is where Seraphax thinks that he's going to free the Emperor's soul to ascend to godhood in the warp and utterly destroy chaos. The guy is so corrupted it's ridiculous. While Seraphax has used his sorcery through the centuries to keep the taint of the warp and mutations among the 10,000 eyes to a minimum, he himself has become too far gone. Half his head is wreathed in warp fire constantly. It doesn't consume his flesh, but it is a constant burning on half his face and head, a small price he has to pay for the favor of the dark gods. But where Seraphax is beyond redemption, his warband is not necessarily evil or even all corrupted. And in his own twisted way, he thinks he is doing the only thing that will revive the Emperor. So he really thinks he's doing the right thing. But that's what someone whose mind has been warped by Tzeentch would think. When the lion and his risen sons arrive on the world of Sable to confront the warriors of the 10,000 Eyes, they pretty much get their butts kicked by Seraphax. He grabs the lion in warp chains and shackles him and is intending to suck the lion's soul out. And the lion doesn't even get to defeat the sorcerer himself. Seraphax's second in command, a lieutenant named Balor, stabs Seraphax in the back and redeems himself. He had never succumbed to chaos despite being second to Seraphax, and indeed the sorcerer had used his powers to prolong Balor's life as it was, keeping the taint of the warp at bay for centuries. But even as close as they were, Balor knew they were on the wrong side of things, and that his brother was either crazy or on more space coke than Lord Excrucius of the Emperor's Children. What Seraphax became was something horrific and awesome, a terrible nightmare, and it made Balor really see firsthand what not only he himself had supported, but also what the 10,000 Eyes had become and had always been about. So Balor presents himself as a knight seeking forgiveness, after saving the lion and the risen by slaying Seraphax. And the lion forgives him, and states he wants Balor to rejoin the Dark Angels as one of his risen. But Balor reveals the dark truth that he is dying slowly, corrupted at last by the demon-infused warp blade he used to slay Seraphax with. And so he asked that the lion grant him a quick death, so he didn't degrade into a corrupted Chaos Marine, slowly becoming what he hated. And the lion granted Balor that, as a kindness. It was actually pretty touching and really sad. It was at this point in the story that the lion goes back to the Mirror Caliban and eventually is forced to confront a major demon who is able to shapeshift into the form of each of his brother Primarchs in turn and taunt him. Eventually he defeats this demon or warp entity, whatever it was, and he is able to claim another prize. Like fealty, which he pulled from the stone in a total King Arthur Excalibur moment, the lion is rewarded with the Shield of the Emperor, an artifact belonging once to his father and now granted to him. As Guilliman was granted the sword, the lion is granted the shield. And this thing is exactly what he would have needed to defeat Seraphax. It was after he receives this boon that the lion becomes aware that the Blood Angels are looking for him, as rumors of his return has spread throughout the Imperium Nihilus. At this point, the lion is not fully aware of the state of affairs of the Imperium. Eventually, he meets up with the Blood Angels and befriends their chapter master Dante, who shares with the lion some key information after an awkward introduction. But ultimately, the lion learns that Guilliman lives and runs the Imperium, which he's really happy to hear. And this is where things get crazy. It is at this point when we go from Mike Brooks' Son of the Forest novel to the Arks of Omen storyline that happened at the end of the 9th edition of Warhammer 40K. And it's quite a doozy. If you've been following the Dark Angels lore as long as I have, or or longer, as many of you were playing them even in 2nd edition 40K, then you know that the Lion forgiving his fallen sons that will accept redemption is a huge thing. It changes much about the Dark Angels. After all, their whole thing is hunting the fallen and being very, very secretive about it. But that is all changing. One of the sacred tropes of Warhammer that has existed for decades that is getting the treatment the community has been begging for years. The Dark Angels and their secrecy are entering a new era, where the dynamics are completely being redefined. And I, for one, believe that is going to lead to some seriously messed up things happening, because it is Warhammer 40K after all, and this far future is grimdark as hell. And this all kicks off when the Lion takes his newly formed squad of Risen Marines to battle the forces of Vashtorr and the World Eaters on the world of Wormwood. They show up to bail out the Dark Angels, who were hunting down Vashtorr with everything they had. Literally every one of the Unforgiven chapters, including up to 3/4 of all their Marines, were on this mission. But before I can explain just how epic El'Jonson's return was and how much ass he kicked, I have to explain what it was he walked into, because the fighting had already become an absolute shit show. After Vashtorr and his forces, along with Abaddon, had attacked the rock itself, the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, Azrael, called all the Unforgiven to his side to go wreck this new Vashtorr guy's face. Similar to how in the devastation of Baal, Dante called all the Blood Angels' successors to defend their homeworld. They showed up, using successor chapters to harry the fleets of the other traitors who were protecting the sector. And the world they arrived at, Vashtorr's spot where he was chilling, was a biomechanical nightmare world that seemed both alive and possessed. It was madness, a wasteland of flesh and steel. And of course the Dark Angels hit the ground and get a newly summoned Angron called right down on their heads. And the World Eater's Primarch would waste no time at all and totally ruined the Grand Master of the Deathwing's day and smashed him. Belial was shattered and broken, but the Dark Angels didn't have time to deal with that. In orbit, they were winning until Abaddon the Despoiler showed up with his fleet, and from Horus's old flagship itself, the Vengeful Spirit, the War Master led a counterattack that all but ruined the Unforgiven's fleet. And just when it looked like it would be a solid Chaos victory, both in orbit and on the ground, the Blood Angels fleet showed up and sent Abaddon packing, ostensibly to regroup for another counterattack. This turned the tide in the morale of the Marines fighting both on Wormwood and in its orbit. But the massive surprise of the announcement by Dante that they brought with them not only the Blood Angels as reinforcements, but the literal reawakened Primarch of the Dark Angels, Lion El'Jonson himself, reinvigorated the Loyalists. Just as it looked like Angron was going to destroy the living hell out of the Deathwing, Commander Dante and the Sanguinary Guard themselves descended from the sky in their golden armor and came straight at the Red Angel. Blood Angels and Dark Angels alike started concentrating their fire on the World Eater's Primarch. And it started to work, a bit. But Angron was not about to be deterred by a few simple Space Marines, no matter how badass they were, and he absolutely smashed the Sanguinary Guard, and Dante. As the Red Angel Angron stood poised to deliver the killing blow and split Dante in half, the Dark Angels were shocked to see that the Lion emerged from nowhere, materializing from the shadows right between the broken Dante and Angron. Angron bellowed, "Alright, so now you know what the Lion walked into. It's time to get into just what he did." The Lion looks over at Azrael and they exchange a glance which lets the Dark Angels know that it is up to them to win the day on Wormwood. The Lion literally puts a ton of pressure on Azrael, but conveys, again, all in just this one glance, that he will be running interference and taking on Angron one-on-one so that the Unforgiven can get the job done. And that's precisely what he does. The Lion and Angron's battle is absolutely epic. It covers a lot of physical space and descends deep into the depths of the biomechanical nightmare that is Wormwood. The Lion gets absolutely battered, but every time he is able to get his shield up between himself and Angron, the blows the Demon Primarch delivers reflect back on him. And this is where we truly see the power of the Emperor's shield. Nonetheless, it is the Lion's brain which defeats Angron. The Red Angel, having not slain anyone in over 2 minutes straight, is in terrible pain due to the butcher's nails, and this makes him annoyed. He doesn't even take the time to rationalize what it means that one of his loyalist brothers is before him fighting him. Angron just stays in his usual nuclear fury and only knows he's annoyed, and the only thing that's going to calm the nails is killing the enemy he's battling and going on to the next one. And the Lion uses this blind fury to his advantage, as they fight across what is essentially a Dark Mechanicus industrial weapons production plant. Lion uses a plume of steam and timing to cause Angron to overextend in his attack and impale himself on the tip of fealty. It wasn't a mortal wound, but it would be enough that it gave the Lion the upper hand and he could smash Angron with the Emperor's shield. And he used the point of the shield to repeatedly bash Angron in the neck until his head came off, causing the usual Primarch death explosion. Wormwood is starting to rupture and warp, the planet itself convulsing. The Dark Angel's Supreme Grand Master Azrael helps Dante regain his feet, and the two order a strategic withdrawal. Azrael states that he doesn't know where the Lion is, but knows that he will be able to get off the planet and into orbit. Azrael and Dante are the last two to board up, and the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels bear away as many of their dead as they can. But it isn't nearly enough. Between the events on Wormwood and in orbit, the fleet being smashed and whatnot, the Unforgiven have suffered unimaginable losses. Belial was mortally wounded and had to cross the Rubicon Primaris in order to remain alive. After the Lion Forest walks through the Mirror Caliban again, and rendezvous with the Dark and Blood Angels fleets, they see that Wormwood is the stitched back together, literally Frankenstein fragments of Caliban itself, and not even the rock will be able to destroy it. Vashtorr lets Abaddon know that he has completed his mission, to retrieve an artifact known as the Key. The Archifane activates the T'Chulcha engine, and Wormwood is sucked into the warp as Abaddon and Vashtorr go searching for the lock. Once they activate the lock with the Key, they will have access to the weapon. So at this point, the Arks of Omen story arc ends, and the Lion is returned to Warhammer 40K properly and reunited with his sons. And this is where things get pretty damn dark, because the Risen Marines are all fallen in the eyes of the Dark Angels, literally men they've hunted across time and space for thousands of years. When a Risen Marine patted Azrael on the back during the battle on Wormwood, Azrael was seriously uncool with it, even though the Marine had arrived with their Primarch and obviously had El'Jonson's blessing. It still didn't sit right with Azrael. So, they have a lot of healing to do. But what is weird is in the Dark Angels 10th edition codex, we get some really fun tidbits of lore concerning how this is all going. The Lion allows Azrael to remain titled Supreme Grand Master of the Unforgiven, and allows the Dark Angels to continue to hunt the Fallen. But it gets pretty deep and pretty dark here, because the Lion now wants to interrogate each of the Fallen himself, in private, alone. Sometimes he will emerge from an interrogation and let the interrogator chaplains like Asmodai take over and do the old business as usual for the Dark Angels. But other times the Lion and the Fallen will both have completely disappeared, ostensibly forest walking through Mirror Caliban. It so happens that occasionally after this happens, new members of the Lion's Inner Circle companions appear out of nowhere, and only he, and perhaps Azrael and Belial, know the identities of these Marines. So yeah, the Fallen who want to repent are allowed into the most hallowed place within the entirety of the Unforgiven, Lion El'Jonson's trust. But it appears that nobody knows what happens to those who don't come back. What the Lion does with them has yet to be revealed to any beyond the Inner Circle and Grand Masters. Now that he is back, he's keeping secrets from his sons, which is only fitting as the Dark Angel's main trope has been secrecy for decades now. The hunt for the Fallen may be darker and more sinister than ever, but it offers redemption to those few who are both worthy and willing to take it. In a lot of ways, the Lion is letting the established order feel as if they still have control and a say, and they certainly get to keep up that facade for appearances. But at the same time, he is circumventing them and having the final say on everything. This fits with his sort of control freak personality, even if he isn't reactionary like he was when he was young. This all makes the Lion and the Dark Angels more compelling, in my opinion, than they were before he returned. But we have yet to see how the Lion and Guilliman will react to each other whenever they inevitably meet. And from what we know, the Lion is even more pissed off about the weird, superstitious, hyper-religious cult the Imperium has become than even Guilliman is, so they might be able to bond over that. But I don't honestly see it going well. I think that there are old wounds that need to heal, and I think that Guilliman will try to force the Lion into some sort of Imperial leadership role, when that isn't what the Lion is all about. When the Space Knight, now known as the Knight of Nihilus, takes to the field, he is a serious force too. As we see when the Lion arrives with the force of Successor Chapter's Marines to reinforce Lazarus and his men, who are just getting worked by Tyranids, the Lion appears much like he did before Angron, just right in the midst of battle, and immediately kills a Screamer Killer Carnifex as his Risen take down another with their greatswords. Lion engages a third and draws it into a kill zone where it's cut down by fire, before proceeding to absolutely destroy a Hive Tyrant. The Bug gets pissed after the Lion chops its sword arm off and uses its whip to grab Lion around the throat, but El'Jonson just bashes it with the Emperor's shield, cuts the whip, and decapitates the thing before going on to smash the now disheveled Tyranids. An absolute beast, who can appear out of thin air, anywhere in the galaxy, to confront the foes of humanity. Yeah, that's the Lion now. The Emperor's justice that can just materialize and wreck your day if you're on the wrong side of him. This is amazing for the Imperium's people, but it's sort of a loose cannon for the Ministorum and other administrative groups like the Ecclesiarchy. So when the Lion goes to a world, he shows up to help the citizenry, and the local armies, planetary defense forces, and even militias. The Lion seldom parleys with the leadership of any planets he goes to, as he sees the entirety of the Imperium as unworthy and corrupt. He'd rather work directly with the people who he's helping, in diametric opposition to Guilliman, who is trying to steer a sinking ship and using all the resources that are expected of him. Guilliman is thrust into the role of mini-emperor, where the Lion is still the same guy he was, the exterminator of the enemies of mankind. And what has happened in the past with the Dark Angels, the many secrets they keep will definitely come back to bite them. We still have yet to see how he will respond to Luther, and whether or not he will forgive his old friend. And we have yet to see how he feels about Cypher, who is carrying the Lion's sword and has recently worked with Guilliman. Now I, for one, as a Dark Angels fan and player, am still pissed off that Guilliman snapped the Lion's sword over his knee. That was pretty janky, but whatever. Fealty's awesome. But were the Seraphax plotline and the recent plotline in the Cypher novel as well foreshadowing? Is it in some way Lion El'Jonson's fate to end the Emperor's life, finally killing the hollow corpse on the throne so that the Emperor can finally either return, as he is a perpetual, or ascend to true godhood and wreck face in the warp? After all, it seems that Cypher went into the throne room in order to use the Lion's sword to do just that, but was telepathically stopped by Big E and told not to not do it, but that it wasn't yet time, which is very interesting. Perhaps the darkest secret of all, beyond the murder of the neophytes on Caliban during the Heresy and beyond the fate of the fallen and the risen, is that the Lion is literally the Emperor's exterminator, something he is often called. But what if the term was not meant as the one who exterminates on behalf of the Emperor, but one who exterminates the Emperor? I know it is a bit of a stretch, but it's just a thought, and as I laid out, all the clues are there, including some pretty deep, decades-old foreshadowing that is only recently starting to pay off. We'll have to see where this all goes, but as of this moment, I'm calling it. The uncrowned prince, Lion El'Jonson, truly is the darkest of the Emperor's angels of death, the first among demigods, unequaled by any being in the 42nd millennium. And like the 3rd edition Warhammer 40K rulebook stated in the margins, a dagger in the dark is worth 1,000 swords at dawn. Good thing for the Lion that he's both. Games Workshop have truly knocked it out of the park with his return, but we may yet still need to keep our fingers crossed in the hopes that the lore going forward continues to be this damn good. So there you have it, the return of the Lion, and what he's done, and what may happen going forward. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, then think about becoming a channel member. It really helps support what we do here. Das Vidania.